Now, we all know that security is the very foundation on which all development can and should flourish. And in our first panel entitled Protecting Our People, Achievements in Citizen Security, our panelists will discuss the many challenges, or retos, to citizen security, including transnational criminal organizations, drug trafficking, and arms trafficking, and what different security forces throughout the region are doing to address those issues. Our moderator today is Dr. Ryan Berg, the director of the Center for Strategic and International Studies Americas program. Speakers, if you can please come up.
Eso. Muy bien, muchas gracias. ¿Tú? Qué bueno, muy bien.
¿Cómo fue al avión?
Todo bien, gracias. Me siento en cualquier lugar. Buenos días. ¿Está bien aquí? ¿Está bien aquí?
Okay, thank you. Is it what?
Okay, is this working? Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to FIU for organizing this excellent conference. Congratulations, Leland and others who are intimately involved in organizing this excellent event. Thanks for being a constant presence in my inbox over the last couple weeks. This morning's panel, we're here to discuss citizen security and achievements that we've made in the past years in citizen security. And this is a perennial challenge for Latin America and the Caribbean as countries throughout the region struggle to combat resurgent criminal organizations, root out corruption, strengthen access to justice and rule of law for all of their inhabitants. Efforts to improve citizen security are both fiercely local and international in character. On the one hand, community relationships, trust, and on-the-ground knowledge are vital to the success of violence reduction efforts. On the other hand, the challenges faced by municipal and community authorities are transnational, and in some cases, global. Addressing these accordingly requires cultivating strong partnerships, which is the theme for this conference, at the institutional and people-to-people level, with a major role for U.S. leadership basically at every step. So I want to introduce today's speakers. First, we're going to have Dr. Samantha Chaitram speak. She's a fellow with the Caribbean Policy Consortium, a research manager at the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, an adjunct lecturer at the University of the West Indies, and a part-time Spanish interpreter for the Ministry of National Security, Trinidad and Tobago. She wants me to emphasize in her introductory introduction here that she does not represent the government today. And she is the author of a book called American Foreign Policy in the English-Speaking Caribbean from the 18th to the 20th to the 21st century, which was published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2020. Next, we'll have Sandro Torres Avelar, who was born in Guyana, and raised in Brasilia. Avelar headed the Secretariat of Public Safety at the Federal District between 2011 and 2014, where he was responsible for implementing policies to reduce crime through the Programa Ação pela Vida, with a focus on regionalization on the fight against organized crime and integration between the security forces. Next, we'll have María Paula Romo Rodríguez, served as Minister of Government under President Lenín Moreno in Ecuador from 2018 to 2020. With recognized experience as a politician and as a university teacher, she was elected and served as a legislator in the Constituent Assembly of Montecristi, and later as an assemblywoman for the province of Pichincha for the 2009 to 2013 period. And lastly, immediately to my left, we'll have Ms. Jacqueline Charles. She's a Pulitzer Prize finalist and an Emmy Award-winning Caribbean correspondent at the Miami Herald. Many of you have probably read her stuff. I certainly have. She began her journalism career at the Herald as a 14-year-old high school intern before graduating from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's School of Journalism and Mass Communication, where she was later honored for her contributions to the field of journalism as a 2022 inductee into the NC Media and Journalism Hall of Fame. So with that, I want to give 5 minutes or so to each of our participants today in the panel to make some opening remarks about citizen security and some of the areas that they cover, and particularly to focus, as is the theme for this panel, on some of the achievements that we've seen. I have no doubt that this panel will talk about some of the challenges, as many conversations about Latin America and the Caribbean tend to do, but we also want to try as best we can to focus on the achievements. And first up, we'll have Dr. Samantha Chaitram. I have a clicker here for you. I understand you have some slides that you want to use, so if you can pass that down. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Good morning, everyone. Listen, right quick. Just trying to figure out. This?
Is it the green button? There we go.
Right,
Okay.
yeah.
The green one.
The green.
Yes.
Oh, that's not my presentation.
We have the presentations are reversed. I think that's, there you go.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. It's nice to be back in Miami. I did my PhD at University of Miami, and for the last 4 years, I worked with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, which I no longer am with the TTPS. I was recently appointed Director of Counter Trafficking in the Ministry of National Security. And my presentation, as I said, has nothing to do with the government. I'm representing the Caribbean Policy Consortium this morning. So I just wanted in my 5 minutes to give an overview of the levels of violence and crime that is plaguing the English-speaking Caribbean. Inside crime labeled the Caribbean as a murder hotspot. As you can see from the slides, we have some of the highest rates of homicides per 100,000. And a recent firearms study stated that CARICOM member states, their violent death is almost 3 times the global average. The study also pointed out that firearms are used in more than half of all homicides in the whole Caribbean region. And the US domestic market is the largest source of illicit firearms and ammunition. Most of the illicit firearms circulating are handguns. And while we've had recent rifles and rifle ammunition emerging concerns, their use by criminals remains limited. And most of the firearms trafficking is through maritime cargo shipping, particularly common in the Caribbean. You can see from this study that the majority of the guns come from the United States. In Trinidad and Tobago, it's a bit less, it's 52%, because the firearms are trafficked also from South America. The National Firearms and Commerce and Trafficking Assessment, which was commissioned by President Biden, showed that the dominant firearm type manufactured in the US was rifles, but that changed in 2010 when pistols became the dominant firearm. If you look at this chart, when I worked at the TTPS, I collected data from 2001 to 2021 to show murders committed with firearms. And as you can see from the slide, most of the murders are committed with firearms in my country. Total firearms seized and found by the police between 2002 and 2021, the majority were pistols, followed by revolvers, shotguns, homemade guns, and then rifles. The TTPS uses the E-Trace system, which is the ATF program. We have very good relations with the ATF in Trinidad and Tobago. There's an ATF agent in the US Embassy in Port of Spain, which assists the police. And so what I tried to look at was where the guns were coming from and the total number of guns traced between 2012 and 2022. While the majority came from the United States, they also came from countries like Brazil, Austria, Italy. Some traces were unknown: Germany, Spain, Belgium, Argentina, Czechoslovakia. These were some of the guns that were seized by the police service last year. A lot of assault rifles that came in a barrel and was found in one of a shipping company. And guns are coming through our ports, but of course there's also corruption because there are complicit officials for facilitating the trafficking of the guns. Last year, Trinis were charged with smuggling firearms from Florida into Trinidad and Tobago. And the guns were purchased by straw purchasers in the Tampa area. And this smuggling ring actually took place between 2019 and 2022 from Florida to Trinidad and Tobago. Now, the international regulatory framework, there are two instruments: the Firearms Protocol and the Arms Trade Treaty. Most CARICOM and Latin American countries are parties to these treaties, but the United States is not a state party to the Firearms Protocol. Neither has the United States ratified the Arms Trade Treaty. President Trump ceremoniously unsigned the treaty, and President Biden is yet to rejoin the United States in the Arms Trade Treaty. Last week, CARICOM heads of government held a regional symposium to address crime and violence as a public health issue because of the epidemic of crime and violence in the Caribbean. And CARICOM has called on the United States to reciprocate and join the Caribbean in its war on guns. And CARICOM has also agreed to stand with Mexico on its legal action against US gun manufacturers and retailers. So what would a public health approach involve? The Cure Violence model, which came out of Chicago, basically has three elements for this model, which is to detect and interrupt transmission of violence, anticipate where it's likely to occur and intervene before it occurs, change the behavior of the highest potential transmitters, and change community norms. And I think I will stop there with my presentation.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Sandro, do you also have slides as well? Or just one slide? Do you have slides or just one?
I have, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I have just one slide.
Okay.
It is the Brazilian map.
Brazilian map.
Go ahead, Sandro.
It's
Can you put the Brazilian map?
the map. Can you put the map up?
Gentlemen, can we get the map up? There we are.
Thank you, Ryan. I want to thank the entire organization of this event. I want to give special thanks to my friend Anthony Pereira, who recommended me to this event. And I will talk briefly about Brazilian security. And when I brought some slides, but it doesn't work. So I want to talk also, Robbie, who helped me to download this map. I think it's enough to explain some important points about Brazilian security. Well, Brazil is a huge country. Okay. Brazil is a huge country. And we have also proportional problems to its size. We have really huge problems about security, especially because we have borders, large borders with some countries like Colombia, Peru, Bolivia. There are producers of cocaine, and this reflects in our numbers, in our figures about the violence in Brazil. I would like a little bit about each region of Brazil. Brazil has 5 geographic regions. Maybe the most known is the North region, where is the Amazon forest, and the whole world is concerned about the Amazon. The Amazon has environmental crimes like logging, criminal fires, irregular mining, but there is some high numbers about urban criminality as well. So we have this kind of problems that are very specific for Amazon. For example, the environmental crimes, but the urban crimes are a matter that we are very concerned as well. Amazon is over there, is the north part of Brazil. And its side, there is the northeast part of Brazil. That is the poorest region of Brazil. In the northeast part of Brazil, we have wonderful beaches, and millions of tourists go to Brazil to visit these beaches, but we have also a high number of urban criminality. You can see clearly there the imbalanced social situation of the country. Here in the center of the Brazil, in the Midwest of Brazil, we have the capital, Brasília. That is a very peaceful city. It's a huge contrast with this part of Brazil, where is the border here, where is the border with Bolivia and Paraguay. But in Paraguay, we have the most violent border of the country, in a city called, in Brazil, Ponta Porã, and in the other side, Paraguay, a city called Pedro Juan Caballero, is the bloodiest here, the bloodiest border of the country. Here, in the southeast part of the country, we have some of the most famous cities of Brazil, as Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. Rio de Janeiro is a classic city to show our imbalanced society. You have very rich neighborhoods sharing the same space with favelas where very poor people live. And of course, it reflects in the numbers of the crimes, because an imbalanced society cannot have fair numbers. It's a critical point of the country, and we have to be very concerned about it. And also in southeast part of the country is São Paulo, the richest center of the country, where there is no, the numbers of the violent criminality are not high, but we have another kinds of problems, like, for example, financial crimes and so on. In the south part of Brazil, in the states of Paraná, Santa Catarina, and Rio Grande do Sul, we have practically European numbers about violence. The numbers are really low. We don't have serious problems with this kind of urban violence. But in this state of Paraná, where we have the triple border between Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina, we have a serious problem with smuggling and drugs and weapons trafficking. So in this part, in the border, the numbers of the urban violence reflects a bad reality where we have the organized gangs fighting for the control of the drugs trafficking and also weapons trafficking. Well, in this huge country, we have huge numbers as well. It's very proportional. So we have a huge number of inmates in our prisoner system. We have almost 1 million inmates. We have 500,000 officers of our police, and I want to highlight that we have only two federal police with something like 30,000 officers who are responsible for the security of the whole country. But in each state, we have two kinds of different police: military police, who works wearing uniforms, and the civil police, who normally doesn't wear uniforms, but they act before the crime to try to investigate and identify the author and the materiality of the crimes. In Brazil, we have the total of 500 officers and 60 agencies. Only two with assignments throughout the whole country, and the others just in the 27 states. The numbers are really concerning numbers, because we had in the last year we had 40,000 violent crimes, 40,000 deaths. That is really a huge number. And they are trying to change this reality, integrating the police. Maybe this is one of our most important goals. But more important than this is investing in technology and overall in education. Brazil lacks this kind of investment in not a short term, but facing a long-term result. For 10, 20 years, we need to have to work with this kind of mentality. I really do believe that making the long-term investments that we are starting to do will have better results to show next years.
Thank you very much, Sandro. Thank you very much indeed. Maria Paula, please.
Thank you, Ryan. Good morning. Thanks for having me. And with your permission, I'm switching to Spanish, so I will be able to say everything I want to say. Si este panel se habría hecho hace 3 años, probablemente habríamos compartido muchísimas cosas importantes sobre avances en materia de seguridad y de institucionalidad de seguridad en América Latina. América Latina venía en un camino de profundizar su seguridad democrática, la profesionalización de la policía, mejor tecnología, sistemas de predicción criminal. Sin embargo, en estos últimos 2 años, en estos últimos 3 años, las cosas han cambiado dramáticamente. Y hoy que estamos aquí sentados, hablamos en el contexto de un deterioro gigantesco de la situación de seguridad en América Latina. Entonces, todo lo que podemos decir sobre los avances y las conquistas hoy se queda corto frente a lo que está viviendo el continente. Y para tener algunas medidas generales, y lo que voy a tratar de hacer es compartir solamente algunas ideas. Pero en los últimos 3 años, América Latina ha pasado de tener un promedio de 17 asesinatos por cada 100,000 habitantes, que esta es la tasa que se usa para poder evaluar a lo largo del tiempo y entre países. América Latina ha pasado de tener 17 homicidios por cada 100,000 habitantes a tener 23 en promedio. Pero países como el país del que yo vengo, el Ecuador, ha pasado de tener 7 a 27. 7 homicidios por cada 100,000 habitantes a 27 homicidios por cada 100,000 habitantes en 2 años. ¿Qué está pasando en América Latina? Porque es urgente tratar de averiguar qué está pasando en América Latina. Estoy en este tiempo colaborando con the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom aquí en la universidad y el tema de seguridad lo vemos como uno de los grandes desafíos para el hemisferio, uno de los grandes desafíos a asumir para el ministerio, para el hemisferio. Nada parece suficiente, les decía hoy, y ¿qué ha pasado? El COVID, no solamente el virus, sino las medidas para enfrentar la pandemia, las de mitigación, el cierre, lo que hicieron los estados, los efectos económicos, ha sido devastador para América Latina. América Latina tiene el 9% de la población mundial, pero tuvo el 32% de las muertes de COVID. Con el 9% de la población del mundo entero, el 32% de las muertes por COVID estuvieron en América Latina. El COVID puso en evidencia los problemas estructurales de nuestras sociedades, de nuestros estados y de nuestras economías. Y mientras para el sector formal de la economía y para los estados la recuperación ha sido durísima, probablemente no la hemos alcanzado en buena parte del continente, las organizaciones criminales aprovecharon el momento para crecer, para expandirse, para encontrar nuevos mercados y para abrir nuevas rutas. Y eso es parte de lo que estamos en este momento viviendo. Al mismo tiempo, estas respuestas estatales que resultaron cortas frente a lo que estaba pasando, cero frente a las expectativas que tenía la población, lo que hicieron fue que también disminuyeron en lo que ya estaban haciendo. Yo creo, y es parte de lo que hoy se está estudiando, que además de la tasa de homicidio, es urgente que pasemos a evaluar otra tasa, la de resolución de homicidios, porque la impunidad crece de manera alarmante en el continente y nuestras cárceles se están llenando con las personas que son el último eslabón de la cadena de las organizaciones criminales. Y estas organizaciones criminales cada vez más especializadas, cada vez más conectadas, más y mejor conectadas con el mundo, lo que ven es en estas personas en las que son encarceladas las piezas que son las piezas intercambiables de la cadena. Si es que no trabajamos con mejor inteligencia y respecto de la actividad económica de las organizaciones, va a ser imposible frenar el avance que tienen en América Latina. También se ha diversificado la actividad criminal. Si hace pocos años hablábamos de América Latina y el tema de seguridad básicamente como un problema de tráfico de drogas, hoy tenemos que hablar de minería ilegal, hoy tenemos que hablar de tráfico de especies, de contrabando, de cibercriminalidad, de extorsión y de tráfico ilícito de migrantes. El tráfico ilícito de migrantes se ha convertido en una de las grandes industrias criminales en América Latina y esto está agravado por la crisis humanitaria de Venezuela. No podemos cerrar los ojos a que tenemos en el continente una crisis de refugiados más grande que la de Siria. 7 millones de personas significa una crisis de refugiados más grave que la de Siria, con la diferencia de que en Venezuela no hay guerra, o no como la conocemos. Y esto se ha agravado de una forma realmente alarmante. Para terminar y no excederme en el tiempo, se debe añadir como un elemento muy importante la sobrecarga que en todo este periodo han tenido las fuerzas del orden. La policía ha estado en la primera línea de respuesta también frente a la emergencia de estos últimos años y lo ha hecho con menos recursos, teniendo que atender más actividades y en muchos lugares en un proceso en donde va perdiendo autoridad. En Ecuador, en las protestas, entre comillas, yo creo que hay algo mucho más complejo pasando, pero en Ecuador, en las protestas del 2019, llegamos a tener secuestrados 408 policías y militares y 31 periodistas, repito el número, 408 policías y militares secuestrados y 31 periodistas secuestrados por comunidades indígenas, que como son los protagonistas de los secuestros, ya no se llaman secuestros, sino retenciones, como acaba de pasar hace un mes en Colombia, y como empieza a pasar en un proceso de minar la legitimidad y la autoridad de los estados como los conocemos y de los estados en donde funcionan las democracias liberales en nuestros países. A eso podríamos añadir una situación extremadamente vulnerable de la población que ya estaba en riesgo en los temas de seguridad. América Latina tiene al menos 3 países hoy en donde más de 100,000 niños se quedaron huérfanos por COVID. Más de 100,000 niños perdieron uno o sus 2 cuidadores a raíz de la pandemia. Y esto pasó en Perú, en México y en Brasil. y ninguno de los estados ha desplegado una política integral para atender lo que esto significa y la situación de vulnerabilidad en la que millones de adolescentes se ponen, ya sea para ser parte de las organizaciones criminales, ya sea para ser los nuevos consumidores de lo que estas organizaciones están traficando en nuestros países. Resumiendo, en América Latina hay una disputa por el control del territorio y por la imposición de la autoridad entre las organizaciones criminales y los estados. Si queremos preservar las democracias como las conocemos, hay un asunto urgente que atender ahí.
Thank you very much, María Paula. Thank you very much. Finally, thank you for your patience.
That's
Jacqueline.
fine, that's fine. They all touched on, some of the issues, the control, the fight for territory in Latin America that I'll be talking about in terms of Haiti, and of course, the refugee migration crisis. So I cover Haiti and the English-speaking Caribbean. And when I think about this issue, I think about particularly 4 countries. We have a Trinidad expert here, so I'm going to focus on 3 in particular. And in the first presentation, I saw Turks and Caicos at the top, and I'm originally from Turks and Caicos, and unfortunately, I lived through this drama last year in terms of this exponential increase in crime. And I think that Turks and Caicos is an island, we're a dependent British territory, basically 40,000 people spread out against, 6 islands. And so when you get one murder, it's one murder too many. And this is we go to sleep, but our doors open because everybody knows everyone. And if somebody breaks into your house, you already know, who it is. The particular island that I'm from, there's like 1,000 people, that live there. And last year, my family found themselves on the other end of this, where we were a victim of gun violence that happened in Providenciales, which is a tourist town. And that is where the majority of the murders took place. And so when you've got a small country like that, and everything is about tourism, you're starting to feel it. But you said talk about examples of what work, and what happened in Turks and Caicos is despite the challenges, and this is a country that's like 90 miles from Haiti, it's dealing with the migration, the refugee crisis, as you just heard. They basically called in the reinforcements. They reached out to Jamaica, they reached out to the Bahamas. And they basically brought in police officers from those other CARICOM nations to basically come in. And they also reached out to the UK because we are a dependent territory, although we are responsible for our own self-governance, but basically saying we have a problem in this island and we need you to help. And, this is coming out of a British system where, back in the day, the local police were not from that particular country. They would basically bring in police officers from the outside. In order to try to deal with the corruption issue. We've also seen partnerships with HSI in the United States. And so it was like all hands on deck. So you have that example, and today you have people feeling a sense of reassurance, but at the same time, if you're in an island where you basically have been safe and all of a sudden now you're dealing with, high murder rates, people are uneasy. They're having to do drills about guns in school. These are things that are completely unfamiliar. So that's what's happening in many parts of the English-speaking Caribbean, where these islands are no longer, these sort of safe paradise that we think of them as. And then I'll just go to Jamaica, an example. We've seen Jamaica, a country that has long struggled, with high rates of murder. And every time, they're doing these emergency declarations, you see the population sort of up in arms. But what I've noticed over the years is people a little bit more accepting of it because people are sort of fed up with the crime. And so they've managed to figure out that balance while still having, this high rate, but at the same time being able to zero in a place like Montego Bay when it starts to get out of control, and working with the police and with the armed forces to go after some of these hot spots. So I take you to the extreme of Haiti. So I'm also Haitian. And I'm also living this trauma. This morning I have a story at the Miami Herald, and it's really about, Haitians arming themselves with machetes and stones and basically fighting back against the gangs. It's essentially vigilante killings. And it is horrible, literally beheading folks. The way how this incident happened was last week, Monday, in a particular area of Port-au-Prince. A couple of neighborhoods, sort of, lower middle class, but surrounded by slums. They basically have had a peaceful existence. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're awakened to the sound of automatic gunfire and gang members on megaphones saying, we've seized control of your neighborhood. And so the men in those communities evacuated the women and the children. I noticed because I have people who live there, and they saw women and children coming down out of the mountains with whatever belongings they could carry. And then the men grabbed machetes. And the gang basically had divided themselves 20 groups of 20 and 30, but they were also low on ammunition. And this is probably why events turned. And so they basically went on a manhunt. And so some of those gang members were trapped in ravines. They were trapped in some of the slums. The people in the neighborhood basically said, we're not standing for this. A group of gang members, suspected gang members in a bus were passing through a complete police checkpoint, and the police had them descend. They were on the ground, and an angry mob came in and basically took them out of police custody and burned them alive in many cases. And this has now caught fire throughout the country, because in other communities where they either didn't have a gang problem or they don't want to have a gang problem, they are basically being their own security, and they're doing this in partnership with the police. And you're getting this sort of mixed message. On the one hand, the police are saying, no, we shouldn't do vigilante killings, just turn them over. But the other reality is quietly the police will tell you the prisons are overcrowded, the judges are corrupt, and escalating gang violence has gotten out of control. Over 1,600, crimes in terms of gang rapes, kidnappings, killings. This is a country that I can tell you 12 years ago, I was much more comfortable going to Haiti than I was going to Jamaica. And today, according to the FBI, just in terms of US citizens and resident aliens, the number of kidnappings have gone up 300%. It's a country where 12 million people, and you only have maybe 3,500 police officers out in the streets throughout this territory on any given day. And so what you see is the population saying, I cannot depend on the police. I really don't have an army. I cannot depend on the government. Outside help isn't coming. And they've decided to take, matters into their own hands. So far, the feedback from people is like, oh my God, I made reservations to go to dinner. There are kids in the streets. But the fear is that the gangs are going to retaliate, because we've also seen this movie before. Just last week on the 19th, there was a massacre over 100 people in a town outside of Port-au-Prince, and that was a retaliation by a gang because the citizens decided to fight back by putting up barricades after another massacre happened in that same area in November. So that takes us, and I'll wrap it up, but it takes us to the whole issue in terms of arms trafficking. This is the big issue throughout the Caribbean, and certainly in Haiti, is the fact that Haiti's a country with a US arms embargo, but yet arms and ammunition is getting into this country. And so today, people like myself are wondering, okay, is there going, are more arms, ammunition going to get in? Because once the ammunition get in, that is where the tides are going to turn, and that's where the gangs are now going to be even more empowered to go out and stop running scared. We'll stand there.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for that. And I'm going to come back to you on the question of vigilantism. I want to go to Samantha, our first speaker, and ask a question about homicide rates in the Caribbean. So in 2022, 4 out of 5 countries, the highest homicide rates could be found in the Caribbean. You gave us a little bit of a sense in your presentation about what's driving some of this violence, but the theme of the conference is partnerships, right, in a decisive decade. So how are governments as well as international organizations and partnerships working to curb this trend?
So I'll speak a little bit about my country, which I'm most familiar with. Last year, INL, through the US Department of State, is funding a program called the GRACE Initiative, which is being implemented by the Pan American Development Foundation. And this is targeted for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to train police in community policing prevention initiatives, and also for intelligence-led anti-gang initiatives. So the US Embassy is trying very hard with the police to implement these types of programs. But previously to the GRACE program, which is designed for the police, the Inter-American Development Bank, I think it was in 2008, 2009, funded the Citizen Security Program, which was actually a success story in Trinidad and Tobago, where they adopted the Cure Violence approach, which started in Chicago, in Trinidad and Tobago, in communities in the Port-au-Prince area, which were the most violent areas. there were about 36 communities, which were treatment areas for the violence, the cure violence model, which I outlined in the last slide. And it basically targets the most violent offenders and those who are prone to be victims of violence. So how it works, I interviewed violence interrupters. So they are community workers and violence interrupters. Violence interrupters are members of the community who, some of them will serve time in jail and they have reformed. And you need interrupters who the members of the community trust, because police trust, confidence in the police is quite low in my country. So if people don't want to trust the police, then how do you stop violence? And so these violence interrupters risk their lives. They are from those neighborhoods and they act as mediators to try to prevent retaliatory shootings. They were trained by the Cure Violence program that came out of Chicago. And after 2 years, these communities actually saw a reduction in violent crimes. Even the hospitals that were in those communities saw a reduction in shootings and woundings. This is a big cost to the country. And now that CARICOM heads have stated that they're taking a public health approach, a public health approach really means using the cure violence model. So funding for these types of programs, I think, is one area where the United States can partner because it had worked in the past. And so that's one recommendation which I would have.
Thank you, Samantha. Sandro, I have a question about prisons in Brazil. And Maria Paula mentioned prisons in her opening remarks, which I think is very useful. What we've seen in the hemisphere is a dramatic rise in prison-based criminal organizations that have broken, in many ways, our mindset on the way to fight organized crime. Many of us thought quite naively that the act of incarceration was the end of the game, right? You've got the bad guy. They're no longer going to be a threat to citizens, and yet they continue operating when they go to prisons. And in Brazil, perhaps we have one of the best examples of prison-based criminal organizations. There are many, but I'm going to just ask you a question about one of them, which is the First Capital Command, Capital, and ask, well, first I'll say, I think it's the most sophisticated criminal organization that many of you haven't heard of or don't know enough about. What reforms do we need to see in Brazil to break the hold that these gangs have inside prisons, as well as limit some of their ability to direct their operations on the outside? Because they operate from within prisons, but they command large groups of people on the outside.
It's a very difficult situation because the most important leaders of the organized crime, of these gangs, they are in prison, in federal prison, and in federal prison you can have the control because there are just 5 federal prisons in Brazil with 208 places. If you consider our reality, when we have almost 1 million of inmates in the whole system. So this kind of leaders, they are really aparted than the crime, but they have some contacts outside the prison, and they keep commanding the crime, even being arrested and even being inside the federal prisons. Well, we are in Brazil. We are thinking about be less hard with crimes that they are not so serious as trafficking, as murders. So we are trying to think if we can get the system with less inmates to dedicate our efforts to that that ones who really need to be in prison. And there is a social discussion about it, but in fact, nowadays we have to think about it. We have almost 1 million of inmates, and only part of it, a small part, are really persons who really need to be inside the system. Well, I think it is.
Thank you, Sandro. Maria Paula, your research on COVID and the post-COVID landscape in criminal enterprises and security is really fascinating to me. I want to ask you a follow-up question based on your remarks on the question of orphans. This is something that really stuck out to me in what you said. And is there any approach whatsoever that is looking at this challenge, as you've so clearly laid it out, that these children in the region who have lost parents to COVID could be the next line of recruits for criminal organizations? Is there any effort whatsoever to think about this? And if not, what would be your suggestions as ways to sort of integrate some of these children into society and make sure that they don't become that next line of recruits?
Gracias, Brian. Son estudios que apenas empiezan a hacerse. No hay ahora mismo en ningún lugar del continente una política pública enfocada. Y yo lo ampliaría. El tema de los niños, de los adolescentes es especialmente dramático, pero hay grandes poblaciones en alto riesgo en este momento en América Latina. El tema de la migración irregular, de las víctimas de trata y de tráfico, el tema de los niños y adolescentes que perdieron sus estructuras familiares, son todos parte de un problema similar. Poblaciones inmensas en alto riesgo y que no están siendo atendidas, que hoy son parte de la crisis que vivimos, pero que en el mediano plazo va a agravarse mucho más. Y un elemento tal vez adicional, si bien hay pocos estudios aún, sobre todo en América Latina, sobre el impacto de esta crisis del COVID y las medidas de mitigación y las decisiones y los efectos, en particular en el tema de seguridad, creo que sí podemos usar el approach de la economía criminal, de la teoría económica del delito. Y la pregunta es entonces, ¿por qué las personas cometen delitos? No se aplica para responder a todo tipo de delitos, pero funciona para responder sobre todo al crimen organizado y también nos da una respuesta sobre cómo ser más eficientes al combatirlo. Y es que muchas de estas personas u organizaciones están participando en estas actividades porque tienen ganancias altas y riesgos bajos. Y entonces, aunque parece obvio, pero debemos enfocarnos todo lo posible en que tengan ganancias menores y riesgos mucho más altos. Porque de lo contrario, vamos a seguir encarcelando personas mientras no atacamos el funcionamiento y los incentivos económicos para esas actividades. Pero creo que hay todavía mucho que hacer y poco que se haya encontrado, ya sea desde el punto de vista del análisis o de soluciones específicas.
Thank you, Maria Paula. Jacqueline.
Yes.
Getting back to the question about vigilante groups, because I think when many of us hear the story that you told us in your opening remarks, we quite understand, right, the impulse to defend your community. We've also seen the rise of vigilante groups in other pockets of the region with insecurity. We've certainly seen plenty of cases of this in Mexico, for example, in states like Guerrero, Michoacán, and others. But what usually happens with some of those vigilante groups is that they become organizations in their own right. They eventually develop interests, they develop a set of structures and more formalized organization and become a group in their own right that then comes to threaten security. Do you anticipate a similar type of development that we've seen in other parts of the region with some of the groups that you've been writing about in Haiti?
In talking to people, in Haiti who've been observing this, because what's been happening is that you've had these citizens brigades that have been mounting now for a while, where people in neighborhoods basically became their own neighborhood watch, right? Using WhatsApp to, keep people informed about what's happening. And then it sort of translated off of WhatsApp to physically where people were taking turns, patrolling rooftops, patrolling their neighborhoods. Now what they've done is they're blocking the entries to their neighborhoods with cars, tires, whatever. They've imposed their own curfews. If you're in a neighborhood, they're verifying, do you belong there? But the fear that everybody has right now in terms of even breathing this sign of relief is, the case of mistaken identity. When the population starts to play judge, jury, and executioner. And I've seen, in recent days, cases where, a family is saying, hey, there's this guy, he has mental problems, please, he's not a gang member, don't attack him. Or you're hearing reports of somebody that was killed because they had dreadlocks and people assumed that that they were a gang. The other real fear is that, first of all, people are angry. This is a country, you named the crisis that exists, a security crisis, an economic crisis, to hear that, somebody is kidnapped and the gang is asking $200,000, $400,000 US, and they're getting it, but your family sends you $200 from the United States and you can't get it from the banks. So when you talk to people, what they're telling you today is the gangs, but tomorrow it's the oligarchs, it's the people in the private sector, it's the banks. And so that is the fear that everybody's having right now. Yesterday, I got a text message about somebody in the private sector who lives on the coast, and he was beaten. And they're using this slogan I won't repeat, but it's a particular slogan that they've been using, and that while they were beating him, they were repeating this slogan. So that is the fear that this is now, it's like, lighting fire in a haystack, and then it's going to get so out of control, and you don't know where to go. Because last week, even people who were concerned, everybody just went silent. It was like, and the few people who were courageous enough to speak up about it, people were coming after them on social media. And it's not just in Haiti, but also outside of Haiti.
Fantastic, thank you. I want to ask a question of all of you, and I'll start with you, Jacqueline. We'll go down the panel. And then we'll open up to questions. We've got mics set out here on the wings. So if you've got a burning question, do line up at the mics and get ready to ask it. I will have a period of time for questions and answers. But first, a question for all of you. Mayors and municipal leaders are often on the front lines of the security policy challenge confronting criminal actors. In light of the recent cities summit that was held in Denver, Colorado, how can local leaders be better incorporated into international partnerships and assistance programs for improving citizen security?
Well, I think in the case of Haiti, today you're looking at a country where there's not one elected official. You've got, people who are saying that we need outside intervention, people who are saying you don't. When you look at the U.S. involvement, you really don't have, you have, I think, one DEA agent in the entire country right now that's present. You have somebody from HSI. You have the FBI there because of the kidnappings, but you really don't have a strong U.S. law enforcement presence. And at the same time, the U.S. and Canada, huge, funders for the Haitian National Police. But one of the criticisms that comes up repeatedly with Haiti, whether we're talking about security, we're talking about assistance, is the fact that Haitians are not at the table, that when decisions are being taken, it's being taken on behalf of them rather with them. So I think that regardless of whether it's an elected official or not, that the challenge for the U.S. and for others who really want to assist this country is to find a way to bring Haitians around the table and find issues that everybody can agree on and figure out what the roadmap is, because this situation is like 10 years in the making, and it's amazing to think that a country can change so dramatically in 10 years. And so people are wondering, how do you dig yourself out of this?
Is that voice for the Haitian people, potentially the Montana group?
I am a journalist. I think
if you don't want to pronounce on the Montana
I think what happens in Haiti right now is that, there's so many different diverging opinions and groups. I think that today the destiny of Haiti really does lie in the hands of the Haitians, but they have to figure out a way to come around the table, and they have to figure out and decide what do they want in terms of a country. This is a country where institutions do not exist. And I will tell you from the part of from the population, they don't believe in any politicians. They basically feel that 30 years of democracy has not brought them anything but grief and suffering, that things were better when the dictatorship was in power. So that's the challenge for people who believe in democracy, is how do you get these people, regardless of groups of civil society or politicians, but how do you get the buy-in from the people on the ground?
Thank you, Jacqueline. Maria Paula, how do we bring local leaders and better incorporate them into some of the partnership and assistance programs that might be international in scope?
Sí, es una de las, yo creo que todos estamos en los países buscando este tipo de respuestas, cómo la cooperación, cómo la unidad interna, cómo la cooperación internacional puede traernos algunas respuestas. Tal vez en concreto el fortalecer las instituciones. Usualmente miramos las instituciones de seguridad como la policía y las Fuerzas Armadas. Los sistemas de administración de justicia son tan o más importantes que las fuerzas del orden, porque la impunidad es un mensaje muy grave y creo que la cooperación también puede estar ahí, puede estar en la investigación, por ejemplo, en el tema de lavado de activos para regresar a la línea anterior sobre un enfoque económico. Creo que hay mucha cooperación en ese sentido que se puede tener y al hablar de partnership, yo creo que también tenemos que mirar cuál es la respuesta interna en los países. Muchas veces entre país y país en América Latina la respuesta cambia respecto de las fuerzas políticas en disputa e incluso los gobiernos anteriores. Creo que una muestra de fortaleza institucional es, por ejemplo, la de Chile hace un par de semanas, cuando un carabinero fue asesinado y pudimos ver en una sola imagen a 4 expresidentes de distintos partidos políticos en la ceremonia luego del asesinato de un oficial de las fuerzas del orden. Entonces, creo que hay una unidad que construir interna en los países respecto del tema de seguridad. Hay que tener una agenda compartida y una agenda compartida hemisférica y un sentido de cooperación entre las fuerzas del orden y los sistemas de administración de justicia.
Thank you very much, Maria Paula. Samantha.
Right. So I think to have policies that can really be effective, buy-in, implemented, you need to have consultations on the ground with those who are truly affected by the crime and the violence. And so crime prevention strategies should be developed in consultation with the communities most affected by crime. So it should take a bottom-up approach. The people in the communities will know some of the solutions to the problems. In the Caribbean, most of the violent crimes are committed by teenagers from like 15 to 29. So this is a problem of our youths who are at risk. So we need to start with the young people because, I mean, if you want to reduce homicides, well, we have one problem with the firearms are coming in illegally, but we also have, we need to change the hearts and the minds of those who we can still influence. And how do you change hearts and minds? And how do you implement programs to prevent youths from turning to a life of crime? When interviewing the violence interrupters last week, some of the gang members did not want to commit these crimes. They were torn. And that's when they go to the violence interrupters and the social outreach workers to talk about, how they feel about this. And so we somehow need to design policies that can target our youths. And, some of the gang members have actually pledged support to this initiative, which is now called Project Building Blocks, where they do not want retaliatory shootings. They do not want to kill other people in their communities. And so if we can design policies aimed at the youths, at least in the Caribbean region, I think that will be useful. Also, the United States can show support at a multilateral level to Caribbean nations in this newly declared war on guns, since the Jamaican Prime Minister reiterated in the summit that Caribbean countries supported the United States in its war on drugs since the 1970s. We've given all our support to the United States. And we are not manufacturers of firearms, but yet our countries are flooded with guns that come from North America. And by the United States not being a part of multilateral efforts to prevent illicit trafficking and diversion into our countries, they're not sending a message that they are supporting multilateral efforts to curb trafficking of weapons. And so at that level, well, I think that's my point for now.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Sandro.
I only believe in solutions for a long time. I don't believe in solutions in short time. We have to invest in in education, in the change of the mindset of our population, of our community. I do believe if you start to do it now, we will have better results in 10, 20 years, as it occurred in any other countries, not in South America, but in Latin America. Sometimes we expect a solution in a short time to the next election, and it doesn't work. We need really time and serious investment in education and in balancing our societies, because nowadays we have some big cities. For example, I like to say about Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. If you go to the outskirts of Rio de Janeiro, you see millions of people, some of them hungry. So it's very difficult to have a better country, a secure country, in a short time. We really need to invest in the long time, the long term, of course.
Thank you, Sandro. I don't see any folks standing up at the mics on the wings, so I assume that we don't have any. We might have one. And the rule for the Q&A session is make your question as brief as possible, and please make sure that it ends in a punctuation mark, ideally. Thanks.
A lot of comments. So this question is for Dr. Chaitram. The question is, you had mentioned that most of the firearms going into the Caribbean were coming from North America. In some of the research that we had done viewing arms trafficking and arms seizures in South America, we had been viewing that counterfeit parts actually from China, mimicking a lot of the firearms coming from North America, are entering the region as well. Is there anything like that about counterfeit parts or counterfeit firearms entering into the Caribbean and affecting the region there?
Yes, so I don't have the data about the counterfeit parts, but the ghost guns thing is a new thing. And actually for a long time in Trinidad, people have been making their own homemade shotguns. Yeah. So, I mean, ghost guns is like the new term. But yeah, people have been assembling guns for a long time.
And I just want to add, Jay Weaver and I did a story just a few months ago where, the administration basically told us 50% of the arms investigations that they are doing now are in the Caribbean. So that just, it's not Mexico. It's 50% of it is illegal arms that are, flowing into Caribbean countries. So that's a huge problem that they do recognize. And we saw the members of Congress just recently asked the GAO for a report to give them more information on the illegal trafficking of arms in the region. And this is following, the meeting in CARICOM and where they've raised this issue.
Fantastic. I think we have one more on this side.
Hello. Oh, hi. Thank you guys so much for your time. My name is Dominique Addison. I'm majoring in international relations, and I want to ask a question specifically to Ms. Jacqueline. As a Haitian American myself, I find like your words and everything you've told us today very enlightening and also sad at the same time. And I guess I had more of a personal question. So what role, if any, can Haitian Americans play in alleviating some tensions in the country, especially if positions of political power or Haitian representation in politics domestically are seen as unobtainable to the community here?
So, that's
Always the last question.
Yeah.
It's the hardest.
It's a very hard question. I mean, I think that one of the things is in terms of being politically active, right? I mean, someone called me a couple of months ago and they wanted my help, and I was like, I'm writing the stories, but you're a taxpayer, you vote people in. And I think that first of all, you need to figure out, what the position is, but you also need to lobby, those of us who are of Haitian descent or who have people in Haiti, we know it, we're living this drama day by day, but it's being able to get people outside of the community to understand. But one of the biggest challenges is that there isn't a uniform position in terms of the community, but back to what are the issues that we can agree on, and what are the solutions? One of the frustrations that happen is that every time there's a congressional hearing or something, we're very good about talking about the problems, but we're always very short, on the solutions. And I think that's the challenge. It's just getting getting other people outside of the community to understand what's happening in this country today. You heard about, children who are orphans of COVID. The interesting thing, when you drive around Port-au-Prince now, you don't see the street kids anymore. So you're wondering, where are they? Well, they're in gangs. This is a country where the majority of the population is under the age of 30. And so what does that mean? Is it a generation loss? And so it's not just about, we deal with the security, we need to deal with everything holistically. And I think that's where Haitian Americans need to organize themselves around the issues that you can agree on. And then who do you need to start making the calls to, and you need to start lobbying.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nobody wants to be the moderator who prevents people from getting to lunch? Leland, do we have time for one more? Okay, one more. Final question is the gentleman here.
Muchas gracias. Mi nombre es Juan Flores. Represento a la comunidad inmigrante hondureña entre Estados Unidos. Muchas gracias por este tipo de eventos, son muy importantes. Nosotros como hondureños estamos sumamente preocupados con lo que sucede precisamente en nuestro país y en la región, que casi es igual, donde miramos que el crimen organizado está confabulado con los gobiernos, donde miramos que no existen políticas públicas para revertir toda esta situación que sucede, por ejemplo, en nuestro país, y que hoy escuchando a la señorita, perdón, ¿me repite su nombre? ¿Sí?
Romo, María Paula.
María Paula, que hay que compartir agendas compartidas entre las instituciones, y nosotros consideramos que es cierto, pero ¿cómo compartir agendas compartidas si, por ejemplo, en nuestro país está controlado todas las instituciones militares, policiales, instituciones de gobierno por una sola familia, donde el ministro de Defensa de Honduras es sobrino de la presidenta, donde es hijo de personas que están involucrados en narcotráfico, donde toda una familia tiene controlado un país, donde un expresidente como el señor Manuel Zelaya Rosales, exponiendo ayer de que hay que implementar un odio hacia Estados Unidos, y donde vemos que Estados Unidos quiere implantar políticas en contra de corrupción y de todas estas cosas, pero al final se terminan riendo. Por ejemplo, una herramienta importante, la lista Angel, donde se han denunciado congresistas que están involucrados en esta lista Angel, y ellos prácticamente se ríen y dicen que no la necesitan porque ahora su visión es China. Y al final terminamos nosotros como migrantes siendo víctimas de todo esto, y creo que hay que reforzar esas herramientas porque, como bien dice, el crimen organizado se alimenta de dólares, y sentimos que para nuestros gobiernos somos como un elemento esencial que salgamos para que produzcamos esos dólares y esté circulando este crimen organizado. Gracias.
There's a lot to unpack there. Answer whichever question you.
Solamente un par de ideas a partir de estos comentarios. Creo que el señor Flores ha hablado de algo muy importante, que son las políticas de integridad dentro de las fuerzas del orden. Ese es un gran desafío también por el tamaño de las economías que enfrentamos. Los recursos de las organizaciones criminales muchas veces son superiores a los recursos de las fuerzas estatales, y además actúan sin reglas, sin controles legales, sin escrúpulos y sin límite de recursos. Entonces es un gran desafío, y efectivamente es un desafío el combatir a las organizaciones criminales en el marco de las democracias liberales, sin que la población llegue al punto en que esté dispuesta a abandonar los modelos democráticos a cambio de respuestas de seguridad. Creo que se han hecho un par de comentarios adicionales sobre la disputa geopolítica que también está en curso en ese sentido, pero eso merecería otro panel al que me apunto.
We do have a panel later today on that topic, so we won't steal their thunder. As I was mentioning before the gentleman asked his last question, nobody wants to be the moderator who keeps people from their food, so we're going to have to end it there. But this has been a fascinating discussion, a superlative group of speakers. Please give a warm round of applause for Samantha Chaitram, fellow at the Caribbean Policy Consortium, Sandro Torres, Avelar, the Secretary of Public Safety and Federal District, María Paula Romo Rodríguez, the former Minister of Government under President Lenín Moreno, and finally Jacqueline Charles of the Miami Herald. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.